Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Kernodle. A renewed focus on math, science, reading, and social studies is the best way to improve education in the U.S., a plurality of voters say, according to a new poll. Joining me to discuss this is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, tell us more about this poll.
Yeah, so this is the Center Square's voter voice poll. It's conducted by Noble Predictive Insights, and they asked thousands of likely voters, registered voters who were likely to vote, about their views on a number of different topics related to the election, like what they think about different candidates for president, a whole litany of things. And some of those questions were focused on education. And a very interesting one is they asked voters, what would most improve public education in America, and basically had kind of a wide open, question, and then voters could answer a number of different things based on some of the selections there. But that included stuff like spending more classroom time on social and emotional skills, which is something that we've covered quite a bit of. There's a big push for SEL, shortening the summer break, pre-K being part of the universal public education, like free childcare, increasing the length of the school day, reducing classroom size, school choice, basically letting parents send their kids to charter schools or other alternatives using public funds, increasing teacher pay, and then focusing on core subject areas such as math, reading, writing, science, and social studies, which is what you alluded to in the beginning. And so it's very interesting. The poll basically opened it up and said, what do you think is like the silver bullet? And voters said, focus on core subject areas such as math, reading, writing, science, and social studies. That was 39% said that is what we want. And so that had by far the highest percentage of respondents saying, like, that's the ticket, like that's what we need to be doing to improve the education system, followed by increasing teacher pay at 21% of respondents saying that, so a fifth. And then the next after that was reducing classroom size at 12%. And just underneath that was letting parents send kids to charter schools and other alternatives using tax dollars. So if you had like the one shot and you could say, I want to throw my hat in the ring on this, it was very interesting to see that was it's sort of what happens in the classroom, right? Like, let's focus on that, double down on that, and focus on, the reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? Like, that's kind of one of the funny phrases that kept popping into my head as I was writing this, is like, that's like the joke, the 3 R's. So I think that's kind of interesting. I spoke to David Byler, who's the chief of research at Noble Predictive Insights, and he said that they specifically designed it that way. In previous iterations of this, which we covered, and I think the last one we did on this question was in March, it basically said, do you agree or disagree on kind of focusing on some of these hard subjects? And overwhelmingly people agreed. And so I think this is a kind of a clearer way to figure out what people prioritize in terms of like what would fix education or what would improve it, not that, fixing is the right terminology necessarily, but what would vastly improve it. And that's what they found. And he said, the results were, quote, very clear. They think that schools should focus on these core subject areas. And then basically, it's totally, overwhelmingly that's what people want. He said you see some divide. Democrats were about twice as likely to say that we should pay teachers more than Republicans. So there was some, I think, kind of partisan, like jumping onto that. And also 18 to 34-year-olds, they were also one of the largest demographics to say, like, the number one fix would be to pay teachers more, which, I was speaking to David about this, and he said that kind of has like a little bit of a proxy for Democrats, because a lot of younger voters will kind of lean more Democratic. So I think that's just kind of an interesting aside there. But, David said too, David Byler said, the truth is there's a lot of discussion about some of these, core things, but also, teacher pay is a very big deal. And I've talked with, some of these national organizations that are focused on teacher quality. And if you think about, in a business, how do you retain the best talent? How do you attract and retain the best talent? Is you have to have compensation. And so it's sort of one of those difficult things of when taxpayers are asking for high quality, outcomes, how do you try to attract and retain those teachers who are the highest quality so that you can have, this high quality instruction. So it's a very complex sort of, issue there in terms of teacher pay. But a lot of people said too, that that's something that they would want to see. So between those issues, David pointed out that you have between 6 and 10 saying that, these are their preferred solutions. So like he said what voters want is spend more time on the key subjects and more money on teachers. So that's a very interesting kind of takeaway. Is a lot of people are united on like those are the two things. I mean, if like the majority of voters across the aisle, true independents, Republicans, Democrats, and according to this nationally representative poll, that's what they want is this high quality instruction and for teachers to be compensated more.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting because it's sort of like put the two together and it makes a majority. But even without that, I think a lot of times when I look at polls, I expect there to be like, one answer has a majority. But in a poll like this, where there's a variety of different answers, just having such a plurality is very significant. Like 39%, that's nearly double the second place position of 21%. So it's very significant seeing those numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something to remember, that, if you're given like sort of that ranked choice, essentially of like, this is your number one issue, then that 39% like would take it all the way out of the park, right? Like that is what people overwhelmingly want. And the way that David Byler put it too, is that people just want the schools to work well. Like they don't want to have to kind of think, and this is kind of in other conversations that I've had with him, is that you don't want to have to think about it. Like if your schools are functioning well and that your kids are able to go on and have like these high quality lives or high quality jobs, then they're doing their job well. Like people don't want to have to worry about that. So I think that kind of also plays into it. If you're thinking like, what should schools do fundamentally? Like it's not this sort of social emotional learning aspect. It's really just like they want their kids to be able to read and write. And so I think that that's another kind of aspect to this that I've written about quite a bit, is that, and in terms of satisfaction as well, like that's something that when voters talk about their school, they're usually satisfied with their school, but they're sort of generally dissatisfied with the schools nationwide, or like the nation's education system. They're usually more dissatisfied with that in the abstract than they are with their local public school. So that's like, I think, another interesting aspect of it. If like you can see it working and you're more connected with it, then you're going to rate it higher. And so it's just, one of those kind of interesting angles when you're getting into the polling. And I think that that's something that has been fun to track with this voters' voice poll is how the different kinds of opinions have changed over time, but learning more about, what voters will say and kind of that process of polling.
I also thought it was very interesting that 51% of true independents said focusing on core topics was the best way to improve the nation's education system. Just another piece of information that demographic in particular really ranked that one high.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.